understanding rakshasas. Rakshasas is a Sanskrit term for demons, malignant creatures, negative energies. Background. Dear Igor, rakshasas play havoc in our lives, families and societies. If people understood the mechanics of these attacks, perhaps we could better comprehend and discern negative behavior from our loved ones. Question. Could you advise any way we could better protect ourselves from these foreign elements? With sincere admiration. It's a very complex question. At a surface value, it seems like a basic, direct, straightforward question. Some teachers, I'm sure, would prefer to dismiss this question because this question have this terrible air of specific spirituality, right? This kind of new ageness also, one can slip into this, right? Positive, negative, and so forth. But this question, as I can see where it's coming from, is very poignant. It addresses this very direct experiences that we all have, direct experiences that life is made of good and evil, if we are to borrow a more kind of Judeo-Christian perspective here. That these evil forces, the so-called demonic forces, these rakshasas, are always there to upset the harmony as soon as the harmony is to prevail. Anyone who have ever read any epic in any culture, what unites and what runs as a thread throughout the entire scripture, throughout the entire epic, is precisely this leitmotif as the battle between the forces of light and the forces of darkness. And rakshasas represent these forces of darkness. Let us take Ramayana. It is exactly the leitmotif of Ramayana. The very purpose for which Rama incarnates as the one of the avatars, divine incarnations of the principle responsible for the preservation of Dharma, for the preservation of evolution, which is the force of Vishnu, according to the Hindu iconography of these primordial divine energies. That it is precisely the purpose of the incarnation of Rama is to chase Ravana, or to chase Ravana out of Lanka, or to essentially remove the world, free the world from this powerful demon. And this whole scripture unfolds around that. And to do that, there has to be a storyline, there has to be the drama. Rama has to be drawn into this battle. He needs to be invested into it powerfully enough so that he actually can enter that battle with enough fury and force in him so that he can actually withstand what we learn by the time the battle begins of the sheer power that demon possesses as Ravana. It is easy, of course, to dismiss this. Oh, wait a minute, aren't we now in the 21st century? And this is supposed to be darshan of a non-dual teacher, Advaita, tantric teacher. Why do we go into the scriptures now? Can you speak us plain English? Yes, of course. But before we get into a panic, let us just slowly get into this, because this is a very, as I said, poignant, interesting question. the place of evil in the world, the place of negativity, how that negativity seeds, where it comes from, how can it affect us, why does it affect us, how to protect ourselves against it, who is fighting this force, whose responsibility to keep this force in balance or at bay. So the scriptures such as Ramayana redresses this eternal battle with beauty, clarity, and unparalleled force of storytelling, where something very profound is allowed to be experienced whilst we're exposed to that which could be dismissed as a mere story. It is for that reason there is this understanding in certain cultures, certainly in this culture, in Vedic culture, the role and the place of a myth, a role and a place of a lore has a tremendous, tremendous importance. Because, as the preface to Ramayana says, that by mere fact of reading this story, partaking, hearing this story, let alone relating it to others, one is freed from a lot of fears, sins, and limitations. And one is essentially adding a light into this world. Whether this is a superstitious somehow or the PR stand of the ancients, that's beside the point. In Ramayana, Rama does exactly that. He faces the utmost darkness in the guise, or who is essentially upsets Rama to a degree where he becomes his mortal enemy, because Ravana steals Sita. He takes Sita away, and that creates a predisposition. It creates the possibility where by reclaiming Sita, by reclaiming his beloved, Rama has no choice but to destroy Ravana in his seed, destroy demon in his seed. Of course, those of you who delved into these scriptures and are familiar with Vedic wisdom more than on the level of pure fairy tale or storytelling, have heard that the scriptures themselves are the outward expositions of what is taking place deep within. In other words, the scriptures are not just what took or did not take place in actual three-dimensional reality, and it is beside the point. What these scriptures are, what these epics are, an oral exposition, an oral creative expression of the processes which always take place deep down in every human being. And that's what gives longevity to the stories. And that's what gives poignancy to the stories. So this Ramayana, this Bhagavad Gita, any other scripture you take, they are literally structured through our physiology. They are not invented. They are not a byproduct of imagination of the poets, but it is something that is being pushed at the oral level of expression from deep within the field where it is being accessed, and that knowledge is then expressed in the form of a particular story that perhaps is being decorated and given the narratives of the story of here, Rama and Sita. And of course there are other characters. There are Lakshman, there is Hanuman, and so forth, when we speak of Ramayana. So who is Ravana then? Who is Ravana in that story? Ravana is the greatest Rakshasa. He is the king of Rakshasas. He's so powerful, and by the way, he's an amazing spiritual aspirant. Amazing. He's a self-realized as well. Make no mistake, Ravana is not an ignorant being. Ravana is actually someone who performed tapas, who performed spiritual sadhana to such intensity that he won a boon from Shiva himself. And not only that, he managed to subjugate all the planets, all the divinities, so that they were all, as it were, as it is spoken in Ramayana, subdued under the staircase of where he was essentially residing and ruling from. They were all in this very uncomfortable position and bending down, allegorically speaking. All the planets of the solar system, all these divine representations, had no sway over Ravana. So in other words, we are speaking of this amazingly evolved being. There is no scholar who could be compared to the knowledge that Ravana had. He was unparalleled in the way of how he accumulated all this knowledge. This is why he was able to give himself to these practices. And yet, why and what made him a demon? Why was he Ravana? Why didn't he become a being of light? These are interesting questions to ponder on. When I read Ramayana in my day, this is exactly what was bringing to the surface these very deep insights which were impossible to articulate in any way. But it, as it were, became more and more apparent that the drama here, that Ramayana essentially is what is happening at the heart level of every human being. Just as the Kurukshetra, as we know, the Kurukshetra, the battlefield where Arjuna and Krishna, in the immortal dialogue, is nowhere but within our physiology, within our neurophysiology. Every gloss, every exposition on this ancient scripture begins in very early phases of expositions, reminding us that this is indeed relevant to the evolution of a human psyche. This, what takes place on a battlefield, is taking place in the heart, or at the heart of matter of every being. So these rakshasas, that in your question now, going back to the question itself, understanding rakshasas that play havoc in our lives, families, societies. And if people understood the mechanics of these attacks, perhaps we could better comprehend and discern negative behavior from our loved ones. We begin to understand that these negative energies, they are indispensable part of what this world is made of. Because everyone fulfills the role assigned to them in accord with their dharma. And it may sound paradoxical, but the dharma of Rakshasa is that. The dharma of Rakshasa is not being the being of light. So in other words, what really becomes a source of revelation is that when at the end of the Ramayana we witness this final well, this is not the end of the Ramayana, I'm sorry, but at the end of the battle between Rama and Ravana, which takes a long time, and we can see how it wasn't that easy at all. We can see how many times we actually gasp thinking that, my God, there is a possibility that Ravana can win and Rama is not powerful enough to slay this demon. There is something is like not enough in his power, because there is this, seems like all the laws of nature are being at the disposal of this force of darkness. And yet, when Ravana is finally slain and Rama kneels down, he actually doesn't need, he just like squats down to close his eyes, and he pays this last respect to the great warrior, because Ravana was a great warrior. He was an amazing warrior. And what we witness is that peace on the face of Ravana. And at that moment, of course, we realize that now Ravana is being fully absorbed in Rama. So these dynamics here outplace themselves. That this, what was the negative energy, now finds its perfect equilibrium and perfect repose in that what Rama represents. And Rama represents the very heart of every one of us. Literally, it represents the heart quality, it represents this aspect within every being, the aspect, the dharmic aspect, the aspect of this quality which is responsible for the preservation of evolution, so that the life moves in evolutionary direction. So how else do we understand the rakshasas? Is that everything, well, there is first simple understanding is that everything has its poles of opposites. Everything. The very matter of existence, the fact that we can be embodied, is only because that polarity. In other words, there is no possibility for existence if it's not accompanied by a set of opposites. I will remind you that very emblem of the Taoism, the Taoistic emblem, which exemplifies this fluidity of light and darkness in perfect equilibrium, what stands for the Tao itself, with the droplet of white in blackness and the droplet of black in the white area. And we can see that there is also dynamic movement in that. There is this kind of like, we can see this almost like a perpetual motion. And this understanding is very helpful, because one of the biases on a spiritual path of all of us is that we somehow consider that self-realization culminates in cessation of negativity, and everything is then lightness of God. Everything is light, and there is no negativity, as it were. In fact, that is not true. What happens, contrary to all our beliefs, is that everything sits in perfect equilibrium, and that what we consider to be negative has its place, but it's no longer has the power to overwhelm. It is where Ravana, slain by Rama, rests in eternal peace. But that happened only once the drama had the chance to play itself. So in other words, we can turn this now and give it and more of a sequential unfoldment, if you will. And we can speculate that the presence of these negative energies, they are indispensable part which play out in the maturity of our own psyche. Without them, as it were, life will not be invested with enough of that which creates this movement, what otherwise makes the tower the tower. In other words, it's a rosy perspective that life somehow becomes only an affair where there is only light and the absence of darkness. We understand that darkness has its own place. We understand that absolutely everything has its opposite. We also understand that the greater is the light, the greater is the darkness. And that has also its value, because though the darkness may present itself as just that, it no longer disturbs the equilibrium, and that's where we find the repose. Because when the darkness, essentially, that negative energy, it only poses dilemma when it manages to disturb or take us from that what otherwise is being anchored in that what is the totality of our being. And the totality of our being includes everything and excludes nothing. So this is when a lot of preconceived ideas, they simply have no chance and no place, because whatever we might have considered how the world is, how the just world meant to be, it's no longer the case. But as I said, it's a very complex question you're presenting here, because if there is a misunderstanding, if there is a partial understanding of this, then we can easily run into some kind of half-baked conclusion that this perspective justifies evil, that this perspective somehow knows what is right, what is wrong. Not at all. If we listen carefully, we understand that everything is in perfect balance. Everything is already in a perfect balance. The balance here is not in the absence of evil. The balance here is that the evil simply has no independent existence. And that's what perhaps that Christian saying exemplifies. See no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. Why that is? Because one day you will understand that there is no evil. That there is no evil as agency in its own right. There is no such thing what we can call. So in the totality of this existence, in the totality of our beingness as awareness, everything is present there. And that is a devastating experience. That is why it's so terrifying. At some point, we are rid of all these ready-made assumptions of what we have considered the world to be, because it was also constructed. We were given these poles of opposites in order to help us to navigate this world. We were told this, but don't forget, it has its opposite. And that formed us, that formed our psyche, formed and informed us. But if we come to these matters of spiritual revelations, then we cannot no longer dwell in this, because otherwise we live in a perpetual split of a psyche. We live in a perpetual separation, even if that separation is on the level of separating this light from darkness. And it is not that the darkness ceases, it's only a metaphor. When there is a light, there is no darkness. It's just that darkness has no independent existence. And this is why I felt the Taoistic symbol is very fitting here. This is why the wise never fights the darkness, because fighting the darkness only increases the darkness. It gives force to the darkness. You see? The truth is, Rama didn't go to kill Ravana. He was not invested in that. He was invested in getting Sita out of Ravana's clothes, reclaiming Sita back. His rage was coming from that. And the fate of Ravana was sealed, essentially, because that's the leitmotif. It was plotted, like we could say that Rama was essentially subjected to a plot in order for him to do what he meant to do. Then, okay, well, we need to send him to the forest first, and then create an opportunity where Sita is alone, even for a split of a moment, so Ravana can steal her away. And from there on, Ramayana unfolds, you see. So I'm not sure what else we can add to that understanding. You know, as I said, that your question contains this very interesting direction it can go to. But you're also asking, how could we better protect ourselves from these foreign elements? Well, the best protection is to understand they are not foreign elements. Because if you will begin to consider that these demonic forces are foreign elements, then you actually, by virtue of doing that, create the possibility for them to be actualized as foreign elements. And on the other hand, if you consider these energies as part of that whole universal setup, then they no longer have the autonomy of their own. Yes, the drama will carry on. You know also very well that in music it's impossible to have much dynamics if only this kind of notes are being struck. You need to have something which supports that. It's the same in color theory, in everything. In order for the light to shine, you need to have a dark background. Every photographer knows that. In the most striking pictures is when the subject is being lit by the light with a lot of darkness in the background. Am I trying to avoid from your, trying to kind of steer away? No, it's for you to decide. It's for you to figure out. But just that, again, the see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil, so that you understand that there's no evil as an independent existence. But that takes psychological maturity, that's all I can add. That takes that psychological maturity to recognize that in ourselves. Because if we don't recognize that in ourselves, we cannot really be at peace with ourselves. And this is what the last temptation of Christ, this is what the facing the final demons in oneself, is that what also the leitmotif of all these mythological encounters that great beings go through. Whichever way it is, has to be faced. The demon within has to be faced. Because up until the demon is in hiding, then the havoc is being done. The harm is being done. But when we face that, then whatever is being done, it's no longer the working of the demon. This is something else. And that's where the wisdom comes forth. We understand essentially that there is no doer here. No one does this. And with that, we become at a greater peace, and the fear ceases as well. Because we no longer see anyone plotting anything against anyone. How could that be? It all happens at the level of myself. I'm that universe. The universe comes forth out of myself with all its poles of opposites. And likewise, it gets reabsorbed in my own self, where all these poles of opposites no longer are separate. They all are reconciled.